Folks, this is Tom Opre, your host to the podcast where we ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, we strive to help you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Stay tuned for another edition of Shepherds of the Wild.
So Garrett, tell me, what is your position with American Prairie? Kind of give me the elevator speech about what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm our Chief Conservation Officer, and that means that I'm in charge of the Conservation Division at American Prairie. Represents about half of our staff. Basically, everything we do in the field is under my umbrella. I've got 4 directors that oversee 4 different departments under the division. Land acquisition, our rewilding, which is habitat restoration and wildlife work. Landscape stewardship, which is sort of everything not rewilding, which is taking care of the place, fences, roads, culverts, water, etc. And then public access and infrastructure, and that's where we focus on the opportunities we're going to provide the public to access and utilize the land.
Great. So for someone who doesn't know anything about American Prairie, what is American Prairie?
So it's a 25-year-old nonprofit conservation organization founded on the premise of assembling a fully functioning ecosystem in central Montana, north central Montana, and the shortgrass prairie region. We're focused here because A, it's got great intact habitat already, and the goal is to essentially acquire and assemble together properties that are sort of adequate enough in acreage to fully support a fully functioning ecosystem going forward.
So what is that's a lot of technical terms, right?
Right.
Fully functional ecosystems, all that stuff.
Sure.
Is the idea there's a certain amount of land that's in here. So you guys have picked this area here, south central Montana, south of Malta, for a reason. Mm-hmm. Obviously there's some history here about when you guys decided to do it and what kind of the plan is. But looking today and going forward, what really are you guys trying to accomplish here in kind of more in layman's terms? We're trying to create a block of land that, that kind of thing. If you could kind of maybe give me that
Sure.
sense of idea.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about fully functional ecosystem, it's essentially we are located here because it's the best opportunity to buy and put together land that will allow us to have original endemic species present and for it to function as it did historically. And when I say historically, several hundred years ago, and much of that land that we are acquiring was already in really great condition when we acquired it, so we're fortunate for that. At the end of the day, this is a great place to do the project because of the condition the land's in and the opportunity it provides us to achieve that goal. It was originally premised off of research that was done by the World Wildlife Foundation that determined that you need about 3.2 million acres of this particular type of habitat to support those endemic species without much intervention going forward. So if successful, we're going to acquire a couple million acres surrounding the Charlie Russell National Wildlife Refuge, which is sort of the core of the region. And that will be enough acreage to allow species to thrive in healthy numbers and be sustained in perpetuity.
So explain to us a little bit, Nora, you say talking about trying to purchase about 2 million acres of this 3 million acres here, because you're also including part of the Charlie Russell National Wildlife Refuge. But give us an idea of what this acreage is, because I know what I'm getting at is there's some of it it's deeded, that's what you're actually purchasing, but the grazing allotments come with the deeds because of historic land use and agreements with landowners. Explain that, how that, maybe a little bit of history of that, and then kind of where you guys are and how that fits into your overall strategy.
Yeah, so it's really premised off of the sort of land management with state and federal agencies in this region. And most of the public land in this region is managed by the BLM. So those are those grazing allotments you're talking about. And when you purchase a piece of property in this part of the world, it typically comes with deeded acres. Those are private acres. And along with those deeded acres are typically tied or connected to a federal grazing allotment, state or federal grazing allotment. So they kind of come with the land. We don't own them, but you are controlling them by way of a lease, which is issued by the BLM to that landowner, and it's renewed every 10 years, so far as you're satisfying the terms of the lease. So effectively what we're doing is we're trying to purchase enough deeded acres to stitch together this existing public landscape to create a relatively seamless pattern across the project.
Bison. Lots of talk about bison.
Sure.
Why are we talking about bison?
We're talking about bison because in this part of the world, there are a heck of a lot of the endemic species that do exist and do exist in decent numbers. Bison are one of the keystone species to this shortgrass prairie system that were absent. And so the goal is, if you're trying to recreate the system and allow it to fully function, you want to make sure that all of those original endemic keystone species are present and are present in decent enough numbers to do what they're supposed to do. So when I say a keystone species, it's a species that the landscape is reliant on or other species are reliant on. And when I talk about species, it's not just animals, we're talking about grasses, etc. They rely on those species to function and thrive themselves. So bison being relatively absent, it is why we do have a focus on reintroduction at a slow and sustained rate.
So let's talk about bison as far as, you've reintroduced them. I think Pete said there was about 1,000 head that you guys have on all the land you have now, just on 2 properties. Mm-hmm. If you could kind of explain that. And then, like I said, I've read some of the older literature on the bison management plans that you guys have produced, talking about anywhere from an ultimate goal of 10 to 30,000 bison. This is where I want you to talk about carrying capacity of the land. Yeah. So what is really the reality with bison here on American Prairie land, as far as where we are today and really what does the future hold?
Yeah. So as you said, it's really about carrying capacity and what the land can basically hold without degrading the landscape or it having a negative impact on the landscape. So carrying capacity is always sort of one of our golden rules when we're managing for anything. We currently have about 900 head of bison, and that's on 2 properties. So it's on our Sun Prairie unit, and that's on the White Rock unit that we have here. The goal for our bison program really is to honor the carrying capacity of the land and to grow our herd sustainably. And to do so, we have to make sure that we're managing them well. Obviously, we're here at Bison Handling where they're doing their general annual tests and making sure the herd is healthy. And we do that every year, and we do it on both of herds. So the goal of the bison program isn't so much numbers. We've really evolved from that. I think at the outset, we were trying to kind of put a number on what the future might look like because people were kind of craving what that looked like. But we moved away from numbers and really are focusing on good, healthy herd counts and a healthy carrying capacity for the landscape. We aren't going to grow the herd if the property's not going to be able to sustain it. So there has to be enough grass in good quantities in the right areas for us to have the number of bison we happen to have on that property. And again, collectively, we only have about 900 right now. That's not to say we aren't going to grow our bison herd, but to predict a number is really folly. We aren't going to grow the herd unless we have the right property to grow it on, and we have adequate forage for those animals from a carrying capacity standpoint.
Great. Let's talk about this concept of having a big chunk of land and bison going wherever they want to, mm-hmm. feeding and whatever, this concern like we talked about there in the house about overgrazing certain areas and stuff. What really is reality here? What's going on? You do have 2 properties, one that does have cross fencing, one that doesn't have mm-hmm. cross fencing per se. Mm-hmm. Kind of what are you guys seeing on the ground? What do you think the outcomes are? And to those people who say that you're going to end up with overgrazed, degraded soils if you just open up the whole area to bison, what is the answer though?
Sure. Yeah, it's nice to have 2 properties that are managed, I guess, slightly differently. To address the reason for that and the cross fencing is, this property has deeded acres. It also has BLM acres. Bison are classified as livestock in the state and they're managed as such. And we are issued a permit from the BLM, just like you would if you were running cattle. And you are allotted a certain number of AUMs on those allotments and for a season. So we graze them on those allotments and we move them through the allotments through the season. and they take the AUMs that they're allowed to by the permit, we then bring them off at the end of the season, typically early fall, September, October, and bring them back onto the deeded land. So the reason for the cross fencing, the pastures, and the management here is really a function of the lease that we hold with the BLM on this unit. Where we have a sort of a larger unfenced area on Sun Prairie, we are monitoring that herd and those grasses to see what their impact is. We do soil testing, we do test plots where we look at grass diversity and grass quality. And what we are seeing is no negative impact in the landscape from having bison sort of roam as they will. I do think that is a function of they were sort of the original grazer here. They were, they're native to this landscape. They know kind of where to go and when to go there. And I think that's what we see carrying forward. It's genetic and it's in their DNA. To overgraze an area would be to their own detriment. And so we do see them naturally moving, and I do think that's what we're seeing in a lot of regenerative agriculture is, livestock being managed as bison originally grazed. So it's using sort of that inherent knowledge of that species that was here originally and translating it to that the management of cattle, and why they're seeing success there is, I think, that approach.
Great. Let's switch gears to wildlife. Sure. Obviously, you guys have this area's got a rich tradition of having a lot of wildlife. You said there was a lot of species that were here when you purchased the land. What do you see happening to the wildlife? When you first purchased these lands, to kind of where your ultimate goal goes. I mean, and specifically on the wildlife side of things.
Sure. In the sense that we manage wildlife. We manage the habitat for wildlife. The state Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Department is the ultimate manager of wildlife in the state. We certainly defer to them both on wildlife counts and wildlife health, and we follow their rules and regs as they are produced based on their research, their counts, et cetera. What we can do on our land is give wildlife the best possible chance to both not just thrive, but to grow in populations by focusing on high quality habitat. So when we talk about that word rewilding, what that really is just habitat restoration where necessary, and then habitat management going forward. Like you mentioned, a lot of the properties that were acquired are in really good shape, so the habitat is in good shape. So the idea there is just to sustain it. In other areas, there has been some degraded habitat, and where that's the case, then we'll focus on programs that help bring that back, like riparian areas, so riparian restoration. Some land has been converted in this. It's a minority of acres in this part of the world, which is, again, why the project is focused here. There's not been a lot of land conversion, but where there has been, and we do have the opportunity, we will replant some of those converted acres in native grass. That does take a long time. I mean, these grasses are long-lived and they take a long time to grow, even though they can be eaten pretty quickly. So it's a slow process. So that's in sort of the hundreds of acres a year type of thing. But we focus on grass restoration, like I said, habitat quality for both riparian dependent species, and then making sure there's adequate forage, not just for either the bison or the cattle that happen to graze our property, but also for wildlife as well. So making sure it's in abundance so that everyone has enough to survive.
Now, some people, and I'm going to hit back on some of the things we talked about earlier,
Sure.
I've talked about the fact that maybe the plan here for American Prairie initially was to go back and try to recreate something existed prior to European colonization of these lands, Lewis and Clark, right? Yeah. Really, what we talk about improvements on the land, homesteading days. We know homesteaders hammered this country to the point where you ended up with hardpan in places, and it really destroyed the soils in order to functionally make it, trying to make the go on it, right? Otherwise, couldn't keep the land. This idea of removing improvements that have been there on the land. Of course, water improvements that allows for wildlife to move off away from water, down the river shed and that so forth. Really, what's going on here? Are you guys changing the makeup of the land? Are you getting rid of the improvements that existed there? Explain to me what the reality is.
Yeah, the reality is that we're operating in a modern era. It's impossible to return any area probably on planet Earth 100% how it originally was. So we're going to do the best we can to restore and manage this place in as near condition as possible to how it's been for thousands of years hence to our arrival. That being said, as it relates to improvements, we're also dealing with a lot of man-made or human-made improvements on the landscape. That's roads, that's culverts, that's water diversion, that's fences, that's buildings, barns, what have you. Our approach is not wholesale removal of everything. That's not practical, nor is it really probably possible, because some of those improvements are necessary to manage land well. And so those necessary improvements are certainly going to stay. What we do is a really thorough job of inventorying everything on a property when we purchase it, and then we come up with a strategic plan for the improvements on that property. Sometimes if there's unnecessary fencing, we might roll it out, or we might replace it with better fencing, so that's improvements going in. A lot of times in these old homesteads, they're just derelict buildings that couldn't be repaired if you wanted to. So the goal is, we will take some of those down. So there is an aesthetic quality to habitat restoration when you're trying to give someone an experience of what this place might have looked like, 500 years ago. They certainly wouldn't have been staring at a power pole in a house. But certain improvements are certainly going to stay. We're just going to minimize those and make them those that are most necessary. So we may remove some fences. We might roll out a road if it's sort of road in the middle of nowhere. It's not really serving a purpose, or a culvert. Improvements have a lifeline or a lifetime. And so when they reach the end of their life, we kind of assess, is this, worth replacing, or should we, maybe roll it out and remove it? So a big part of our rewilding plan is, defragmentation of the landscape. That's not just fences, that is buildings and other infrastructure as well. So
let's touch on water rights. We talked about that. So some people are saying that you guys are moving all the dams and all the tanks, because that wasn't there originally. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, well, it's similar to when we acquire a piece of property and it comes with that grazing lease. Whenever you buy a piece of property, particularly in the West, it comes with a very specific and finite water right, maybe many of them, which is a certain amount of cubic feet of water diverted from a specific place and for a specific use. Often that's for livestock. Just like with the BLM allotments, there's a sort of a protocol within the agency is you have to kind of use it or lose it. So we have to use those grazing allotments or they'll be lost. The same goes with water rights in the state. If you don't use the water that you're allotted and that you own, it's abandonment and it can be taken away from you. So in no case are we abandoning our water and not using it. And I would say 99% of the time it's being used as it has been historically, whether that's point of diversion or point of use, and that can be stock tanks or reservoirs or water lines, basically to help keep these properties functioning as they are. When things have been removed, and that's really the minority case, is if something was just totally non-functional anymore. A reservoir had fully silted in, a dam breached, and frankly it was a lot more expensive to rebuild it there. But that's not to say we're not reapplying that water in the exact same way somewhere else. So we might just build something better in another place, but we're always making sure that we're honoring that, diversion and that use as dictated by the right. There have been 2 instances so far where we've gone through the process of doing a change of use, sort of like we do with the BLM between cattle and bison, where you are allowed to work with the state to change the use from its original source or its original use, which is likely agriculture, and to basically make it an in-stream flow right, and you essentially putting the water back into the stream that you were taking it out of. We've done that in a couple places where we've had an opportunity to work with the state to do a change of use application. And it's a lengthy process, but at the end of the day, you're able to leave that water in the stream and it not be taken out, and that's not abandonment. So no one else can put a claim on that because the water now is supposed to be in that stream, and the reason for that is because it benefits the fishery. So anytime you go through one of these projects, you work with both FWP, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Their fishery biologists say that yes, it will have a beneficial use to the fishery to leave that water in instead of taking it out. and then you work with the permit side with DNRC to go through the process and make sure it's done right. So we're doing it with the sort of collaborative, it's a collaborative effort with the agencies and through the guidance of our biology friends at FWP, saying it'd be a good idea if you could leave this water in the stream. And that's when we've done it. We've only done it a couple times.
Great. Let's talk about predators. Part of this film is dealing with, just all the issues that people on the ground, ranchers, are dealing with. And we're obviously, our predator populations are expanding for various reasons. We're seeing, wolves in places we haven't seen in a long time. We're seeing a lot of grizzly bears in places where we haven't seen them. And now we're starting to see grizzly bears even on lands that you guys have, right. PN for sure, big sandy area, so right. forth. Some of the stuff that I've read in the past has been about, hey, we're looking to have this be this natural ecosystem where the bison are going to be regulated or by their excess population, anything beyond the carrying capacity, by natural predation, grizzly bears and wolves. And of course, we know that there's a lot of human wildlife conflict going on now because we're seeing bears where we haven't. And of course, when the people interact with them, they haven't interacted with them for 100+ years, right? Right. Really, what is the plan when it comes to predators out here on these landscapes and in the specific area we are here now with this plan of the 3 million acres? What's the reality there when it comes to grizzly bears and wolves? Sure.
Well, the reality today is we can control what we can control, right? We haven't seen wolves yet, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We are seeing the return of the grizzly to their native home. I mean, they were a Great Plains species, and historically were moved sort of up into the hill country and the mountains. And so given the opportunity, it's only natural that they would, try to make their way back out of the mountains and back to the prairie. Where we're seeing that happen is, eventual movement off of the front and through the Rocky Mountain chains and down into the river system, so the riparian corridors. And I think that's where we're seeing them use those really as their sort of transportation corridor to make their way down onto the prairie. You mentioned the PN. That's where we've seen them on the PN, is in that Judith River corridor. There's been a couple documented bears there, but they're not resident bears to our knowledge as yet. And what we think we will see, and I think this is what the agencies will say, is that they're going to continue to make their way down all various river corridors and likely the Missouri, and kind of make their way out here. Our response is, currently, because we're dealing with what we can deal with, we had to react on the PN because grizzly showed up. We had to do something about it, right? So we essentially bear-proofed the PN as best we could. We used bear-proof dumpsters. We have bear-proof trash cans at the residences out there. We put up a lot of signage, making sure people are well educated, having them carry bear spray, trying to reduce and minimize any kind of conflict with grizzlies. That's either from a visitor to our property or with the livestock lessee on the property. So the goal there was to minimize even the potential for there to be conflict or an interface, because that's the ultimate goal really everywhere, right? As long as humans are concerned, or as humans are concerned. With the PN as a known case, we are now trying to be a bit more proactive and start to look at our lands that we own east of the PN and hopefully systematically implement the same prescriptions on the PN on other properties. So making sure they're bear-proofed as best as possible. So you're not giving just unnecessary attractants to the bears to make it to make them more proximate to humans, to their livestock herds, and really let them kind of go their own way and hopefully forage as they've always foraged on their natural food sources. So we haven't had an incident to date, not one that I know of on our properties. And so we want to keep that the case as best as possible.
Well, you might want to check with Lance Johnson on that one, because he told me that he is getting predation of his cattle on there. So when I talked to him,
on the PN?
Yeah, he's like, yeah, we've lost some stuff. I think the way he worded it is that we know that there's some missing. We're just not really sure what happened. So, FYI.
Well, that's news to me.
Yeah.
I have no documented cases of predation on the PN, and Lance has never mentioned that to me, and we speak quite often, so that's news. But
yeah, like I said, I think it was more of, we're missing some, but we don't really know what happened to them. So,
well, there's correlation versus causation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen any evidence of a carcass and evidence of a grizzly near one on the PN. I happen to live on the PN, so I actually have a pretty close eye on it.
Yeah.
Cows are lost in this country all the time. Cows can go places you'll never find them.
Yeah.
I think that's the case with probably every ranch operation, and you always miss a few. But
getting back on the bison stuff, just to kind of get the full figure on this stuff. Really, so there is no number per se. So you covered that. So It's only going to be whatever the land takes, whatever the carrying capacity out, whatever work's done. Is there some sense of timeliness on when you guys hope to achieve the project? I mean, the ultimate goal to have this 3 million acres. I know that you guys have lots of time, right? I mean, but it's humans. We always like to have a goal, right?
Sure.
So what is the goal? Is there a timeline to it? What could people expect from American Prairie? Is it 5, 10, 50, 500 years? I mean,
right.
Give us some idea, because you've got donors, right? You have to tell them something, because otherwise they're not going to give you the money. Usually it's like, well, here's our 22-year goal, right? So.
Well, really, the goal for us, why we've moved away from numbers, is because we really are focused on sustainability and carrying capacity. So that's the driver. And so any future management or any future expansion of the bison herd really will be driven by, again, there being ample forage, it being the right property, and it being the right time. So it's not to say we don't, have a goal of having more bison, but really where they're going to be and the timeline for their arrival on that part of the landscape is really going to be determined on, is it the right property in the right shape, and is it the appropriate time to perhaps reintroduce bison on that property. It's all based on rigorous science, and so we don't want to do anything that we don't feel is the appropriate management move for the organization. Sure, we've got donors, but what I'm telling them is we do science-based restoration, and we are going to manage the herd as appropriate and not overtax the landscape. And so we know it's going to grow, but I really can't tell you how quickly it's going to grow, how many bison or where they're going to be, because it's adaptive management. So we're adapting and we're reacting to conditions on the ground just like any other land manager would. So if a property suddenly isn't in good condition for bison, we might pivot from that property. But right now we have it on 2. It's about 900 bison total this year was the count. I know we will have more bison. We can grow the herds here already on these 2 properties. They can hold more, but it's yet to be determined what that next property might be. Some are better bison properties than others. That will also be a determinative factor. Big breaks country is really, really tough country to fence. So, it's going to be the right property first before just wanting to grow it for just sheer numbers' sake.
So if we do get to a number or a time period in the future, Pete and I talked about the whole livestock wildlife issue and what that comes. If you could maybe touch on that, but also if you get to a point where you've now reached your goal, or the board figures, we're here, we've reached maximum capacity of what we have with what we're trying to do. Who at the end will be the holder or the owner of that animal? Will it be the state? Will they be taking care of them eventually? I mean, will it be this or the feds, or will this nonprofit take care of these animals in perpetuity? Who will be the holder of these animals down the road, decades from now?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball. I can't predict. I can't predict sort of the classification of bison going forward. In the state of Montana, they're classified as livestock, and currently they're managed as such. So that does give us the ability to reintroduce them on the landscape, work with the BLM, work with the permit, and have them managed on livestock going forward. If they are ever determined or converted to wildlife in the state, then management will obviously switch over to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. They manage wildlife going forward. So they're going to make some decisions as it relates to management of bison, as far as, is there a hunting season? Is there, are there places that they should and shouldn't be? That's a wildlife decision if they become wildlife. So we really don't have any control over that. If they're livestock in perpetuity, then that's what the organization's goal is to manage what we own and what's on it in perpetuity. And our goal would be to manage the bison as close to wildlife as we can, with them still being classified as livestock.
Great, good answer. Let's go talk about the use of the land, public access, hunting, recreation. What is the organization's, what is their goal right now? What is the policy when it comes to access by the public on your lands?
Sure. Whenever we acquire a property, we take at least a year, if not 2 years, to really learn the land. So our staff from various departments spend time observing it through the seasons. They aren't just inventorying the improvements. We're kind of inventorying our sort of natural infrastructure as well. What streams are on it, how good a shape are they in, what's the grass condition, et cetera, et cetera. And then, what's wildlife look on the property is another thing. Like what opportunities might that give for people to, go birding, go hunting, et cetera. And that will all ultimately inform our policy for that property going forward and kind of a public access plan. So we come up with a individual sort of management plan for each unit. And when we typically buy a property, it becomes part of a unit, where it's proximate to. But we make that decision every year through evaluation by a cadre of our staff who have a background and expertise both in wildlife science and management. And we decide, how is it going to be managed for public access? Is it going to be very low infrastructure, no infrastructure, really kind of like a wide open landscape that you just kind of explore and roam? Is it a candidate for maybe a hut or a yurt where someone could stay overnight, or you can maybe think about it as a property for a campground? So those are other types of public access. We always evaluate properties when we acquire them for their potential for hunting. We've got over 80,000 acres enrolled, private deeded acres enrolled in block management with the state currently. I think that's more than just about any other enrollee. And we will always have a significant number of acres enrolled in block management. We certainly are doing that both for wildlife, management in numbers, but also to certainly honor the strong hunting tradition in Montana, and to just give people access to hunt areas they haven't been able to historically. So not just the deeded, which they obviously hadn't been able to hunt historically, but also a key tenet of our public access policy is unlocking public land. So by nature of some of the configuration, deeded land sometimes blocked out public land that people had a right to get to, but they weren't able to actually access it because of the deeded configuration. So we're not only unlocking our deeded, but we're actually giving people access to public lands that they weren't able to walk, hunt, bird, hike, enjoy previously.
We talked about this a little bit inside there, that I had a couple people tell me that they've had a hard time getting into their type 2 properties. Can you address that?
Well, you mentioned type 2. So in block management, there's two types of block management. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is the more sort of liberal management regime, where the property is just open to hunting for those species and those seasons. It's kind of, open to anybody, and you just kind of drive up, you sign in, you walk on, and you hunt what you want to hunt. The majority of our properties are managed under type 2, so it's a little more restrictive, in that there are a certain number of reservations every day during the hunting season that we allow on the property. It's all managed through Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. So you have to call their reservation service and get a reservation for one of those slots on that property. The reason we do it that way is twofold. We want to manage the hunter numbers because we are also managing for other users and for our own staff doing the work that they're doing, and to give those hunters a really high quality experience. So by keeping it in type 2, you know that you're one of maybe 2 or 3 other parties on the property. So, a handful, less than 10 hunters maybe a day. I think on the PN currently we've got 3 reservation slots of 3 people. So maybe 9 people can be hunting any one day. That gives you a really high quality experience. You can really immerse yourself, be out there on your own, not cross paths with anybody else. And then the wildlife on those properties are also of a higher quality because there's less pressure. And then the way we're managing the landscape, there's more forage. Hopefully that's higher quality wildlife. It just enhances that experience. So, when we enroll in block management, it's certainly open for anyone to get that reservation. They just have to kind of go through that process. But, they're open for anyone to call, and you pick up the phone, call FWP, and have an experience.
How important is hunting in your overall strategy when it comes to managing these lands? And will it continue on in perpetuity?
Yeah, sure. It's always going to be part of our management strategy. And I mean, I think hunting will always be a component of our management strategy. Again, I touched on tradition. It's a strong tradition in Montana, one that we honor and respect. I think 95% of our staff hunt. So it's something that we're going to want to make sure is available for the general public moving forward. It will be one of many management tools that we use for wildlife. Again, we're managing really for habitat, but not for wildlife. Hunting is a tool for wildlife management, but we're also balancing that with these other uses that I talked about earlier. People that want to go birding or want to go hiking or gravel biking or paddling. So I think it's always going to have a role, but we're managing for multiple audiences. So it's one of those key audiences and constituencies that we certainly manage for. And I mean, we can't be happier with the feedback that we get from people when they experience a hunt on American Prairie, the quality of it, and just that unique opportunity to maybe hunt a place that they never have been able to hunt before, and have the type of experience they had. So
well, I guess the only other thing would be the forethought of acquisitions, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what properties, if you could, kind of give me some idea of what type of properties you guys are you're looking for that fits the model. What is that kind of property? And since you were in acquisitions prior to being the conservation guy, if you could talk to just, the reality on the ground of willing sellers, values based on,
Sure.
because you're a nonprofit, you can't just write these monstrous checks or whatever. So just explain to me how do you guys determine what a viable product property is, and how do you acquire it, and really what is the process?
Yeah, so by virtue of the project area, most properties within we're here for a reason. It's because most of the properties are of high quality and they would be acquisition candidates. There may be conditions that would disqualify them if they had been highly converted, like a lot of cropland. Conversion is expensive, and so that might lower it as a priority, or other factors that just make it like not viable for whatever reason. But I think any property with that's been managed well over generations, has good natural high quality habitat that already exists, is going to be a good candidate. Proximity, or if it's contiguous to an existing management unit, is certainly a qualifier. We like to try and buy properties close to other stuff we own. And so I can't tell you actually what the ultimate shape of this project is going to be, because I have no idea. It's not going to be a perfect square or a perfect oval. It's going to be some odd amorphous shape going forward based on what we do have the opportunity to purchase. So speaking of opportunity, we only enter into willing buyer, willing seller acquisitions. So that buyer has to be 100% willing to sell to American Prairie, or we're not going to be able to acquire it. Oftentimes properties are listed on the open market for sometimes years before we might decide to buy it. So it's certainly not that there aren't opportunities for other people in the region to buy these properties as well. So the flip side of that is properties that aren't listed for sale. I can't tell you how many calls I get, week over week with someone interested in selling their property to American Prairie. That's for a variety of reasons. They might just, they don't have that next generation present that's able to take over the ranch, and they want to know that it's going into someone's hands that's going to, take care of it and steward it like their family would have. So we're an opportunity or a strategy for them to achieve that going forward if they don't have kind of the grandkids coming back home. But I get, again, calls every week with folks that are interested. So it's either sales on the open market or folks contacting us directly and us working with them to figure out what their needs are and their goals for the future might be. We have more constraints in the acquisition market than any private buyer does. We're a 501c3 organization. We're governed by IRS regulations. We cannot pay more than what the property is worth. We get every property that we buy, we get it appraised. We have to, we're stuck with that range of values in that appraisal, more or less high, low side of that. I don't have the ability to, come in and write a big check to somebody because we want a property where anyone else in the private market has that ability. They can pay what they want to pay. So we actually have a constraint there. Like, we may really, really want a property, but it's overpriced, and by law we can't pay that. So we have that kind of constraint around our acquisition strategy too. And then does it serve is it a key sort of component to our growth strategy? Like I mentioned earlier, a good property in the right place in the right time.
So do you guys, and along those lines, you said you guys have to purchase the properties if they make sense to you, and you've got to have a willing buyer. Do you guys ever use third parties to purchase land? Like another company goes out and purchases it on behalf of you guys and then sells it to you down the road?
Yeah, we've done that in one instance, and it's because the seller requested it. Yeah, that's the only time we've ever done it. So they requested that it was sold to a third party.
All right, well, I think we're out of time, so thank you. Well, awesome, great interview.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. You can find this podcast wherever great podcasts live, including on the Shepherds of Wildlife Society website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. Please tell a friend, and let's save wildlife together.